How are you? I hope things are well with you. Right now we're going to take a look at a sinus arrest. And I'm going to do a follow-up video as it relates to a sinus arrest, a sinus pause, and a sinus exit block. And I'll explain more information about those in that video. But right now we're going to follow through the rules for a sinus arrest. So let's start off with, is this a readable strip? And as you take a look, you can identify both P waves and QRS complexes the whole way through, so we can identify those waves, and therefore we're going to go ahead and we're going to call this, yes, it is a readable strip. So yes. Then we want to know whether or not P waves are present or absent. So we're going to circle our P waves just so that we're aware that they're there. So we have our P waves. So the P waves are present. And I want to know, is there a P wave for every QRS? And as usual, we start off on the left, move to the right, just as though you would normally read. There's a P wave and a QRS, and we're just going to link these up so that we can identify that these are actually groups. Okay? And when I get to the end, I've already answered it. There's a P wave for every QRS, so my answer is going to be yes. And then I'm going to shoot it back, and I just bring my little loop down here to make sure that I can account for the QRS complex and that there is a P wave that is actually in front of it. Okay, so right now, so far, my answers are yes, I have a QRS for every P wave, and I have a P wave for every QRS. Okay, so we're now going to get rid of all that material up there, because we now need to be able to start measuring some objects. We got to measure a PR interval, and we're going to have to measure our QRS. So we're going to bring in our calipers here. Okay, so we now have that, and we're going to move to see what we have. And we have 4 blocks, so it looks like we have 4 blocks, which therefore is going to make our PR interval at 0.16. Now, to make sure that this is consistent, we're going to make sure that this was correct, right? This is where we had everything. And we're just going to go right down the 6-second strip to make sure that it is consistent. And it does appear to be consistent. Okay. So I have a PR interval of 0.16 that remains consistent, and I can say yes. Now, is this EKG or is this rhythm regular? And right off the bat, without even identifying whether or not I can put my calipers on it, I can tell you that it is irregular. And you can tell that it's irregular. And we know that it's irregular because this big old area right here is standing out, telling us that, man, this made this whole thing irregular. So in that case, this immediately becomes irregular. And when we say, is this regularly irregular, irregularly irregular, occasionally irregular, based off of the EKG that we have right now, it's going to be variable on a sinus arrest because it could be regular or it could be irregularly irregular. And it could also be occasionally irregular. It just depends. So right now, this one is telling us that this is, because we only have this EKG, this is occasionally irregular. So it's occurring every now and then. Well, let's find out our atrial rate. And because we know that the EKG is irregular, that means that we can count a 6-second strip. And this is a 6-second strip. There are 30 blocks that are here. So we're going to go ahead and count. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 times 10 is going to be 60. And we're going to check out our QRS complexes as well while we're here. 5 and 6. And that tells us that our ventricular rate is at 60 as well. And we know that taking a look at the EKG again tells us that the QRS complexes are irregular. And we already identified that this is probably going to be, at this point, occasionally irregular. All right. So our QRS duration, we bring in our calipers. And our calipers that we're going to take a look at right now are going to identify what our QRS duration is going to be. So as I adjust these, I'm recognizing that this is actually a QRS duration of 0.08. So it's 2 blocks. I'm looking at 2 blocks of the QRS duration, which is telling me that we're following normal conducting pathways. Okay, so I'm just going to move these calipers out of the way for a minute. Just move them over here. So what do we have? Well, right now, if I were to answer all of these questions, which I just did, we would know that this is so far a sinus rhythm. Okay? It's a sinus rhythm. But we have to account for this right here. We have to be able to account for what has happened. What actually is happening here is that the SA node has not fired. Okay? So the SA node has not fired, which means that it must not be working correctly. So we want to measure a few things here, and this basically tells us that the sinus, because there's no visible P wave afterwards, after that QRS complex, that there is no SA node firing. And we know where it should be based off of, let's move our calipers. So if I move my calipers over here, and we start lining up P to Ps, and when I bring my P's this way, there should be a P wave right here. There should be a P wave essentially right here. And there should be a P wave that is right here. Okay? So the problem that we run into here is that, first off, because there is no P wave that has been presented here, this means that the sinus node has arrested, okay, which means that it has stopped. So that's why we call it a sinus arrest. We call it a sinus rhythm, sinus arrest that has actually occurred. So what does this mean for us? Well, let's take a look at our heart again. Okay, so if I have my heart, it sits like this. This is the node that we're talking about. We're talking about that SA node. So if that SA node fires, it usually is firing an intrinsic rate of 60 to 100, and it sends the impulses all the way down this way. Okay, so when we do this, what's supposed to happen is that when this fires, it creates a P wave. And then this impulse continues to go down, where it then creates a QRS complex and then a T wave. Horrible drawing, I know. But the issue that's actually occurring here is that, don't forget that here is the AV node. And if you recall, the AV node is to be a backup pacemaker. What do you notice has not happened up here? Here is where a P wave should have been. There should have been another one here. For whatever reason, the SA node did not fire. It did not generate a P wave. And in this case, it also did not, the backup pacemakers did not kick in. So there was a complete sinus arrest that it did not occur. Nothing happened. This is usually what your big concern is. The longer this goes, okay, the longer this pause goes or this arrest, this is where we start to run into a problem of an individual having a potential syncopal episode. So when you check a patient and you find out that they have a great radial pulse, that's fantastic. Is it regular or irregular? And again, this kind of goes back to, I get the idea of doing an ECG on people. I really encourage it. I encourage 12 leads. When you get to ECGs, though, a lot of times you can detect what the rhythms may be based off of just checking for their pulse. So don't be afraid to reach down and touch your patient's pulse to see whether or not you can help identify whether or not there's a and arrhythmia. And by the way, you may not pick this up on a pulse ox. You may also, though, pick it up on a pulse ox. Potentially, if there is a pause, you may notice that there is a change in the pleth wave. So if it's not producing a pulse with this, you may notice that there is a change in the pleth wave. And you can see that there's no electrical activity that's actually occurring in here, which could be a reason why that person has actually had a syncopal episode. Another good reason to consider that we like to treat people where they are from an EMS standpoint. That is absolutely true, that we want to treat them right where they're at. So we have to be able to put the ECG on them and find out early on whether or not there's any problem. Okay, in the next video, we're going to break down the differences between what the controversy in the literature is between a sinus arrest, a sinus pause, and a sinus exit block. Okay, so stay tuned, and hopefully we'll try to make some better sense out of this. All right, see you soon.